introduce the agenda.
Ad hoc members, I'm Susanna Chen, Assistant General Manager. Before you is today's agenda, and we'll be covering several really important topics. And today's meeting format is a little bit different than what we have in the past. In order for us to cover enough time to cover all the topics, we have asked each working group to designate a few representatives, and those representatives will be participating in the discussion of today's topics, and there will be no time restriction when they speak. And the representatives are now sitting at the table, and for those that are online, they don't get to see them, but I just want to let everyone know they're sitting right in front of the dais. And today we will be covering 3 topics, and the first one is staff feedbacks on the current site design ideas. And in order for everyone that participate in this, attending this meeting, including the working group members that are not designated as representative and the general public, plenty opportunity to provide feedback. We have allowed a public comment for each items that we're going to discuss today. So right after the first items, we will have a public comment. And then our next item is to provide some clarifications on contracting requirements and operation assumptions. Again, we'll have a public comment after that. And the last topic we will cover today is discussions on ad hoc committee's process beyond today and how you can arrive at the options to forward to the full board for considerations. So as usual, there will be opportunity for you to discuss at the end. And also we have the oral communications for public to provide comments on items that are not on the agenda, but it's within your purview. So that's the agenda for the day. And before we go into our discussions, I just wanted to go over the ad hoc committee schedule with you. We added a special meeting for today that is highlighted on the schedule, and we have 2 scheduled ad hoc committee meeting before we bring the recommendation back to the board. And one very important announcement I want to make is that we originally scheduled to bring the item back to the board on November 13th, the board's regular scheduled meeting. However, in order to accommodate all the board members' schedules, because we won't have the full board on November 13th. So in order to accommodate that's everyone's schedule, we have scheduled a special meeting for the full board to review this item. So now the meeting is scheduled on October 20th, and we will start at November, yeah. I'm sorry, November 20th. Thank you. Yes, October will be a little too soon. November 20th, and the meeting will start at 6 o'clock. All right. Now I'm going to move into our first item, key item. It's staff's feedbacks on current site design and idea. So I just want to start with thanking working group members for their hard work. Clearly, a lot of thoughts, a lot of cares, a lot of creativity have gone into develop those ideas. We really appreciate their efforts. As for staff, our job is to evaluate those ideas to make sure those ideas are implementable. They meet the goals of this ad hoc committees and also address the concerns that was brought up at the May 14 board meetings. We hope that our feedback is constructive And the feedbacks are based on our knowledge of the site, our experience working with the county over the last few years, trying to secure permits for the project. It's also based on our professional expertise. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank the county staff because they provided very timely feedback on our questions, and their responses informed our feedback that we can provide you tonight. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark Brandy, our senior project managers.
Can I make just a quick comment? I'm hoping that staff will take the approach of rather, no, you can't do that. And, or if you do that, here are the consequences, or here are some other options that we can't, because I got some feedback, if you will, from our ad hoc last week. And they said, I think staff was trying to be helpful, but we heard a lot of no's. And so I'm hoping today we'll hear a lot of, well, here's what you're going to get into if you go that approach. And here would be our recommendation with the consequences. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think, okay. Yeah, so we are providing some feedbacks and kind of the trade-off of some of the options.
Good.
And we have, like, not everything we have already formulated the recommendations, sure, but there's some areas that we have some feedbacks that we can provide to you.
Fair enough. That's great. Right. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Again, I'm Mark Brandy, Senior Capital Project Manager with the district. I would like to just start where Susanna started as well, which is to thank the members of the working group and the committee for all of the incredible work that you've put in over the last several weeks and going on months now in this process. It's really inspiring to see all the creative work that you've done, and we greatly appreciate it. Thus far, staff has had the opportunity to provide a limited amount of feedback, mostly or entirely in written form, through responses to questions that have been posed to us from the working groups, as well as we recently did receive, as Susanna mentioned, we received some additional feedback from the county that we have now relayed to the working groups as well. We thought we would take the opportunity tonight to review that feedback together, just so that we can touch on some of the key points that the county has conveyed to us and some additional feedback from staff as well. So with that, we thought we would start here kind of at the beginning with this slide, which is simply a graphic representation of the 3 core goals that I think we're all familiar with at this point for the stable site, as documented and established by the 2017 Preserve Plan. So again, those goals were to protect natural resources, maximize public benefits at the site, and ensure the financial feasibility of the project. I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially the heart of the goals. And, it is our position that a viable plan for the site would need to attempt to address, all 3 of these core goals in order to be successful. I certainly think you're moving in that direction, and we appreciate the progress you've made. Just in brief, talking about each one of these core goals in terms of natural resources, again, that obviously means that our goal is to protect and improve the natural resources conditions on the site, or to mitigate for any unavoidable impacts associated with the final proposed site plan for the project. Sensitive resources on the site obviously include things like the creek corridors that are adjacent to the site, existing oak woodlands, the bat habitat structures that are up on the ridge, as well as the proposed restoration components of the site and of the site program. And it's an obvious statement, but obviously, as the scope and footprint of the project has the potential to increase through the planning project, then so too is there the potential for impacts to natural resources to increase. So that's something we obviously want to continue to be cognizant of as we move forward with the planning process. In terms of maximizing public benefits, we obviously have seen a lot of great progress towards that core goal. We're seeing, amenities in the site plan that are directly responding to that goal by providing things like public parking, public restrooms, program areas, et cetera, in the site plan. So we appreciate the efforts that have been made there. And then finally, with ensuring financial feasibility. Obviously, one of the working groups that's been doing great work is on the fundraising side. And, we just wanted to point out again that, the district had an original budget, if you will, or allocation of funding for this project, which was in the range initially of $4 to $4.4 million. An additional, I believe, $1.2 million was subsequently allocated to the project. However, in the most recent iteration, staff's design of the repair project, the estimates for that project, which were again, sort of the minimal improvements required at the site, the most recent estimate at that time had risen to in the range of $9.5 to $10 million. The point being, to reiterate those numbers, is just that whatever the final design is that we come up with on the site, we will inevitably have to look at how to address potential funding shortfalls associated with what's desired at the site and with available funding. That's an obvious statement, but that gap can potentially be closed through either reining in the scope of the project on the site, or through, a means of revenue generation, charitable donations, grants, et cetera, in order to address the long-term financial feasibility. So again, this is just to encourage, as you're already doing, to continue to focus on these three goals in the planning process. With that, we then wanted to provide a little bit more. Again, this is feedback. A lot of this is feedback that we've already provided in written form. And Director Riffle, to your point, I believe that this is really just pointing out key considerations that we would suggest that the working groups continue to have sort of top of mind as you continue to plan the process. In terms of site access and circulation, we have, I believe it's 6 or 7 topics that we'd just like to discuss in brief with you. So the first of these is site access and circulation. So the graphics that's shown here are the 3 site plans that were most recently shared at our last meeting on last Thursday, 1 week ago today. So these 3 diagrams in combination together show the current proposal for site access when taken together. And again, it's all of the blue line work shown on these 3 diagrams would in total equal the current proposal for roadway improvements and circulation patterns on the site. So one thing we just wanted to point out here, which is again, relatively obvious statement, is that the relative extent of roadway improvements that are contemplated currently on the site plans do appear to either be equal to or more extensive than the roadway improvements that were contemplated for the repair project, the prior repair project. And that is fundamentally because the repair project was focused, the footprint of the repair project was focused very much on the lower arena portion of the site, as opposed to the upper arena or more distant locations on the site. And so as the working groups have been brainstorming and thinking big about what happens on the site, inevitably that has expanded, and the relative requirements of how you're going to get to these different areas increases as well. So we just wanted to point out that extent has increased, relative to what was previously proposed.
Any clarification on that? I had in my note that I wrote as you were speaking, I thought you said that it was equal to or more than, but you finished with saying it's greater than.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think it
clarify?
is inherently. And Jay, I don't know if you want to add anything here, but I do think that the actual linear footage scope of roadway improvements has increased from where we were with the repair plan. Is that a fair statement, Jay? Yeah.
And I want to add, there was one of the options that towards the end of our work with the county, when we were talking about the access. And one of the option the county proposed is to create similar alignment of what is proposed here, that we have lower road, but then there's upper road, it's a one-way circulation going up to the upper arena. So if you compare that option, what you're proposing is very similar. However, what you're proposing is two-way circulation on upper arena area. That it definitely increase the footprint of the roadway. But in terms of linear footage, this proposal is similar to what the county was contemplating, but the footprint is bigger. So I just want to clarify that.
Okay, so then related, still on-site access and circulation. We also wanted to share and to discuss, we understand that the current proposal from the focus working groups as shown on the current site plans that we were just looking at, related to the upper access road, which is shown in the upper left corner image, the upper roadway that comes down to the upper arena area. The proposal, as we understand it, is to widen that existing road, which is currently in the range of 8 to 9 feet, to as much as 24 feet, to allow for two-way circulation on that upper road. And that the proposal would be to utilize grading of the hillside in lieu of utilizing retaining walls. So what staff has attempted to do here is we put together a simple cross-section of that upper roadway to try to imagine what the improvements would need to look like in order to accommodate that approach. So what you're seeing here in this cross-section is two approaches of either using a retaining wall on the inboard side of that 24-foot wide roadway, or grading back the roadway, grading back the slope above the roadway in order to avoid the use of retaining walls. And, there are specific county ordinances and requirements associated with this type of work. Specifically, they provide guidance that retaining walls are typically the preferred approach because they inherently reduce impacts to adjacent natural areas, as is our goal for this project. They also have requirements on the maximum slope percentage that would be associated with grading, which would be a 2-to-1 slopes. So again, what we have attempted to do on this cross-section is to visualize what that would look like, just for everyone's information as to what that would look like. And so you can see here that the amount of grading would be quite extensive. And so it's an open question, I think, as to whether or not this would be feasible due to those county requirements, soil conditions, and natural resources impacts. But our feeling as staff is that this particular aspect of the current proposal, may need to be considered again in terms of those original goals for the project. Moving on, still related, but talking a bit more in detail about proposed parking and surfacing aspects of both the roadways and the parking areas proposed for the site. So here we're just showing on the left side of the screen is the current site plan proposal in the lower arena area. And on the right side of the screen is the site plan proposal for the lower arena area from the previous repair plan project. Just to point out a few key differences here, differences in approach that are being contemplated. And so on the left, you can see the areas that are highlighted in the ovals on the plan show in green the proposed parking areas. And what you can see quickly in comparing these two graphics is that the key difference here being that we understand that the working groups are proposing more of a dispersed model of parking, in locating parking, in various smaller places around the site versus the repair plan had consolidated all of that parking onto the northern edge of the site above the proposed retaining wall. So you can see the differences in approach there. We do want to share that, our feedback on dispersed parking throughout the site would be that there are potential issues there in terms of user experience and safety on the site, in that, it does feel like it has the potential to create confusion as to where parking is allowed and not allowed on the site when it's distributed in various locations. It could also lead to the potential for um, users entering the site on vehicles and potentially searching around areas of the site where we wouldn't intend for them to go, such as potentially, exploring the upper paddocks, parking in other apparently available spaces on the side of the road, et cetera. So we do, that is the inherent reason why the original repair plan project contemplated consolidating all of that parking into one location. The additional item that we wanted to point out here is related to surfacing of the proposed roads and parking areas. There's been a lot of great discussion about the potential alternative surfacing in lieu of asphalt on those roadways. And we certainly appreciate that asphalt is fundamentally not great for horses. And this is an equestrian facility, obviously. So we appreciate that. The county, though, does dictate, and we have provided some information from the county, has limitations on where we've heard discussions about the use of gravel, compacted gravel, in lieu of asphalt. The county does have limitations in terms of where gravel could be placed in lieu of asphalt, and that's largely dictated by things like the percentage of slope of the roadway. Anything that's above a 15% grade on the roadway would likely need to be paved, according to the county. Also, any ADA pathways or parking areas would also typically need to be paved in lieu of gravel surfacing. So there's considerations like that that will need to be factored in. And then finally, the county also has a requirement that compacted gravel surfaces, somewhat contrary to what you might think, are considered impervious surfaces. They are not considered perviouses once they are compacted. And therefore, that still triggers the need potentially to do stormwater treatment for any runoff from those surfaces, even though they are gravel. So therefore, on the right image on the screen, the green areas that are shown sort of distributed around the lower arena area, those are bioswale. They're called bioswale treatment areas, which are essentially small constructed wetlands on the site, not true wetlands, not jurisdictional wetlands, but function in a similar way where they would treat the water before it runs off the site. So we mostly just wanted to point that out, that will be a spatial requirement dictated by the county that will continue to need to be factored in to ongoing planning and design. It's typically about 4% of the paved area, impervious area, would need to be allocated for these types of treatment areas. So that's something that is not currently shown on the site plan for the lower arena area. We do appreciate that there's we're seeing an indication in the upper arena area that there is an intention to provide swales along the toe of slope along the hillside, and then contemplating a stormwater basin down near the dressage area. We certainly appreciate that you're thinking along those lines already, and we would just encourage that would also need to occur in the lower area, because you can't take water from the lower arena area and treat it, more distantly and upslope in adjacent areas of the site. So just a recommendation to continue to contemplate those requirements on the site. The next topic area that we wanted to discuss in brief, I think this one is straightforward, is the sewer and septic system requirements for the site. And just highlighting here again in the ovals on the current site plan, we do appreciate that the proposed leach field and septic connections, sewer connections are still shown on the site plan. We very much appreciate that because again, we did ask the county about those questions on behalf of the working groups. We asked the county if there's any way around the need for these this infrastructure and facilities based upon, we heard, some great creative ideas about can we use compostable toilets in lieu of flush toilets. But the fact is county has indicated that because there is existing water infrastructure on the site, that compostable toilets and holding tanks are not allowed, and that flushable toilets would be required. And those are required for both the public restroom as well as the caretaker residence, which are currently shown in the left oval on this image adjacent to the leach field area. So the bottom line is we appreciate that those are on the plan and that we anticipate that they will continue to be necessary. The next topic that we wanted to discuss in brief is the issue of slope stabilization on the site. And again, I think at one of the earliest ad hoc meetings, if not the first ad hoc gathering, we shared a slide in overall existing site conditions of the Bear Creek Stable site. And we pointed out that there are existing fault lines to north and south and kind of everywhere in the vicinity of the site, including the San Andreas fault runs directly through the Alma College site immediately adjacent. All that is to say that there are a number of documented existing active and dormant landslides in and adjacent to the Bear Creek Stable site that we'll have to continue to be cognizant of as we continue with planning. So this image is an overlay again of the current site plan proposal on top of one of the geologic maps that we received as part of the geotechnical study that was originally done for the site. And what we wanted to point out here is the adjacency and the direct proximity of some of the proposed elements as they're currently located on the site in relation to some of these active and dormant landslides. Specifically, the proposed residence on the site is immediately adjacent to the B6 label on this image here, as well as the proposed restroom. So anything along that northern edge of the site is essentially immediately adjacent to the tops of active or dormant landslides. And this issue is specifically why the repair project originally contemplated that significant retaining wall along the proposed parking associated with the repair plan project is because of the relative lack of stability of that entire slope that leads down to the creek. So it does feel like any potential improvements along that northern edge of the site would need to be contemplated in terms of the stability of the slope. We'd have to reevaluate that slope and the potential need for retaining walls and or other forms of slope stabilization. And even if those improvements are relocated further away from the top of the slope, there is still the potential need to do some form of stabilization on that slope simply because in the long term, we want to be able to protect the existing and proposed assets on the site. So that is, something that will need to continue to be contemplated as well. Few more topic areas before I hand it over. We heard a lot of great discussion about the potential use and reuse of structures on the site. And so we wanted to take a few minutes to share some feedback there as well. highlighted here on the plan in the ovals are some of the key structures that were proposed for reuse, which include, from left to right, they include uh, I believe it's called the cottage or the casita, the small existing structure adjacent to Tevis Barn, and then the high barn, I believe it's referred to, adjacent to Tevis Barn as well. There's contemplation of various forms of reuse of those structures associated with the current plan. And then we've also highlighted the hay barn structure as well, which I'll talk about momentarily. But in terms of the reuse of structures, what we wanted to share again is that the potential public use of those facilities is dictated by the classification of those structures, but by the county. And they're currently classified under what's called Group U, is the classification, which includes structures like agricultural buildings, livestock shelters, and stables. So the point being that if public use of those structures is contemplated, we would need to go back to the county and have those discussions again about whether or not those are potentially allowable under that classification or whether a different classification would have to be pursued. And depending upon the ultimate classification that is applied to those structures, if public use is desired, that can then influence the construction structural requirements of those structures, with things like ingress and egress requirements, fire protection systems, and finishing, et cetera. So those have the potential to have a direct influence on the amount of improvement that would be required and the associated cost. One additional note regarding structures is again, we appreciate, the creativity and thinking about sort of the minimal size that might be required were the existing hay barn structure, which is shown highlighted on the right side of this image, were it to be reduced. District staff had previously done some calculations as to what we believe sort of the minimum size of storage facility would need to be on the site. And we had come up with approximately 2,000 square feet of storage based upon our conversations with our landed facility staff. See some heads shaking in the but so the idea there being that what was contemplated in the repair plan was one consolidated location for all of those storage requirements. And we appreciate that what's shown on the current plan is potentially the dispersal again of those storage requirements, potentially not only in a smaller hay barn, but in other locations on the site. So we just wanted to, point that out as well, for consideration, and that, we can potentially go back to our land and facility staff here at the district to confirm sort of what those minimal requirements would be for storage, as well as locations. And then finally, before I hand it off, we'll just end with, again, talking about sort of where we began, which is, again, talking about the project footprint, the overall project footprint for the site. And again, I think it's an obvious statement at this point, but again, the repair project proposed by staff originally was really focused on the lower arena area. And we appreciate again that the working groups are thinking big and coming up with ideas for the entirety of the site. But the fundamental premise being that the larger the scope and footprint of the site, so too is there the potential for project impacts and natural resources to go up, as well as costs. So there's the continuing. We've heard a lot of great conversations around the potential need for phasing of improvements, and so as the potential scope and footprint goes up, so too will be the need to potentially continue those conversations. And just as a reminder, the board did consider site plan alternatives that originally contemplated some of these more distant areas on the site back in the 2015, 2016 timeframe, where they were considering alternatives that would have had uses in things like the dressage area and the upper meadow area. Those alternatives were ultimately not selected at the time by the board as the preferred site plan. So, we would need to potentially revisit that in that context, if the final proposals do include those areas. That's it for me for now. I'll hand it over to my colleague Cody to talk a little bit more about natural resources.
Thank you, Mark. Cody C. Puentes Winter, Senior Resource Management Specialist, and I help out the district with the vegetation program with all things at the district. I just wanted to touch base really quick regarding the mitigation and restoration within the site. There has been what could be maybe some confusion, and I just want to make sure that we're clear. On the existing maps, I do notice that we have identified mitigation areas, and in fact, we haven't identified any mitigation areas. To start off, I just wanted to give a quick definition between the difference between restoration and mitigation. Restoration is an intentional activity that accelerates the recovery of an ecosystem. So we're looking at the health, the integrity of the area, and sustainability of that area for natural resources. Mitigation is an action in which we are trying to minimize or to eliminate the impact of an impact to a certain resource. So that impact could be, say, a tree removal. So we'll be mitigating for that tree removal. We're not restoring that site. The dollar amounts that were presented in the May board meeting, which was, I believe, $500,000 to $750,000, was for mitigation associated with impacts to the repair plan. So that's the widening of the road, the removal of the trees, impacts to riparian areas and such. And so those costs are a direct result of doing any improvements at the Bear Creek stables. I just want to touch really quickly in regards to our mitigation policy. So our mitigation policy is adopted by the full board, and it's under our resource management policies, in which it says that when we can, we want to avoid impacts first. If we can't avoid impacts, then we want to minimize those impacts. And then finally, if we cannot minimize those impacts, then do the mitigation. So that's sort of the lens that we come out when we're looking at projects is, can we avoid impacts? And if we can't, then we want to minimize those impacts. So I just wanted to give an example of mitigation for this particular site. Please note that the numbers that I have up here and all the language in here is not set or final. So these are usually done in consultation with the regulatory agencies. Those are the agencies that are going to be issuing permits to us to be able to do the work. So at the site, what I've identified as potential impacts includes tree removal, impacts to sensitive natural communities. Central natural communities are designated communities by California Department of Fish and Wildlife as needing protection. And then impacts to jurisdictional areas. That's riparian areas, wetland areas, and such. Typically, we would work out with the regulatory agencies to sort of figure out what you see on the right-hand side, and that is what is the ratios that we'd have to mitigate with, what are the success criteria, and then how long do we have to do that. So I put on here some of the typical things that we might see for tree removal. It could be anywhere from 3 to 1 up to 15 to 1. I put down just here as an example of 10 to 1. So if we remove 1 oak tree, we'll have to mitigate by planting out 10 oak trees. Within 10 years, we need to have 7 of those oak trees surviving, 70% of those oak trees surviving. If you don't meet that success criteria, you do need to do additional plantings, and then that the amount of time and years does get extended beyond that. For impacts to sensitive natural communities, typical ratio is 3 to 1. And the difference here is for a sensitive natural community, we're talking about acreage. We're not talking about like a tree that's being removed. So if you're impacting, say, a 1/4 acre, then you're doing 0.75 acres of mitigation. Sensitive natural communities come with what we call membership rules. It says this is what a sensitive natural community, how is it made up? What % of it is made by a certain species or a certain suite of species? Many times it does take, especially for tree-related sensitive natural communities, it could take up to 15 years to be able to meet success criteria. Because like again, I said, it's not about the number of trees, but it's about the percent of the area that you've created. And then finally, impacts or jurisdictional areas. They typically do have a little bit higher of a ratio. Here I put down 6-1. Again, we are looking at enhancing those areas or creating riparian habitat. So after we figure out those ratios and the potential impacts, we actually do the work, and then we can actually quantify what impacts we actually had. So if we had 10 trees removed, we'd have to be planting out 100 trees. 70 of those trees must survive after 10 years. And like I said, we have not picked out a mitigation area. That would be something that we'd have to do, is to find a mitigation area that we could plant out 100 trees if we were doing a 10-1 tree removal, and we did 10 trees removed. Here I have that 0.25 acres of impacts to Valley Oak Woodland, which is what we have on site as a sensitive natural community. There we have to get 0.75 acres covered by Valley Oaks in that site, and that could take about 15 years to get there. Other species would be planted out as well, not just Valley Oaks, but that's the main component that we have out there. And then the potential impact of 0.35 acres impacted to riparian areas. Then we're looking at doing 2.1 acres of riparian mitigation. And there we're looking at a 35% cover area of Valley Oaks plus additional species in that area. And we usually can get a little bit lower of a timeline on that, about 10 years. And with that, I will turn it back over to the committee for their deliberations or questions.
Questions? Comments? Question? Director Riffle? Yeah, Cody, there you are. Thank you. It's always sobering to hear when you come up and present the facts, so thank you. I guess the question is, what you presented was based on what you heard the site and engineering folks come up with, right? So that was kind of the basis.
The basis of the dollar amount that was presented.
Your last slide. Sorry, your last slide. Yeah, so that was based on what the working group came up with, or what?
No, so this was just an example of how the ratios sort of work out and what it could look like. So when I did the original numbers back in May, it was based off of what was known at the time. We did not have a lot of information about how many trees might be impacted.
Okay,
We don't.
I see. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So these are just examples to provide you an idea of how mitigation sort of works.
Oh, okay. What I was wondering is, have we done the calculations, or have we done of what is being proposed by the working group, or at least the direction they're going, versus what our quote repair plan?
So we need a little bit more information to be able to figure out the
Okay.
potential mitigation. In fact, I have our biologists are out there this morning. They just left the site about an hour ago doing a riparian delineation.
Oh.
So that way we can see what the impact is from any encroachment into a riparian area. We can then describe and sort of work with folks about potentially either minimizing or understanding that, hey, this is what type of impact we might have. The part that is more questionable is the ratios that I gave you are some of the typical ratios we can get, but those are in negotiations and sort of outside of Midpen's control. We can talk with regulatory agencies and try to get those numbers down to figure out what they're looking for. But ultimately, when they issue that permit, it will have permit conditions that say, this is how you will mitigate and what those numbers look like.
Okay, okay. And all three of these scenarios are going to probably be in play.
Most likely,
regardless of what we do on that site, right?
Regardless of what we do, we will have tree removal.
Yeah.
Those trees, if they are oaks, are most likely part of a sensitive natural community. Not all oaks are part of
Right.
sensitive natural community, but the ones like along the road are definitely part of a sensitive natural community. So
Yeah.
we will have those impacts.
I see.
The riparian area, that one is the most questionable to me because I think we can avoid those the best once we have the idea of where the riparian delineation shows this is where we would have those impacts. And so that's a discussion point at that point of, hey, do we want to avoid as best as we can per our mitigation policy, or do we want to encroach upon in that and do the mitigation? Mitigation, like I said, does come with increased costs. Mitigation can be quite costly just because of the time frame involved.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Director Holman.
Yeah, before I go to a couple of questions, could we, is there just one mic for the table down here? Is there just one? So, I think it would be appropriate to thank the people who've come here to represent the working groups. And if you could just quickly introduce yourselves and which ad hoc you are from, starting on the left over here.
My name is Pamela Warren, and I'm with Site and Architecture.
My name is Kristen Reichmuth, and I'm with Operations and Programming.
I'm Marcy Colonna. I'm with Partnership and Fundraising.
Nancy Cole, Fundraising.
Mike Bashu, Architecture and Engineering.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being here. And I really do want to thank staff too for accommodating a not typical arrangement for a meeting here. I think it'll help facilitate us being more practical in how we address some of these issues. So thank you for that. I have, I'm going to start with just 2 or 3 questions. So about mitigation versus restoration. Thank you for the description. I think that's pretty clear. I could have sworn that I read on the plans or in the staff report, and I can't remember which because it's been a little while, but I really could have sworn it's like that the plantings are considered mitigations for I think it was the upper mitigation was considered mitigation for some work that went on at Alma College above. So it wasn't identified, as I recall, it wasn't identified as restoration, it was identified as mitigation specifically.
So mitigation for Alma College was completed not at the site there, but was handled somewhere else. It was taken up to the tree farm that's at Summit Road and Bear Creek Road, where we planted out trees at that location for the mitigation site. So the preserve plan does show this site as being restored, not as mitigation, but as just one of the activities that we do that speaks to our mission to protect and restore the natural environment. So at the time, there was allowed use for horses to be going through that site, which was causing a lot of erosion issues. And so by taking the horses off of that area, it allows us, we've already seen that some of the hydrology issues that are going on there, the erosion issues have corrected themselves. Other issues have popped up like invasive species, which we're working on actually over the next week or so. But it is a restoration site was identified in the preserve plan. That is just one of the actions that we could take for at a preserve level.
Okay, so it doesn't sound like you have recollection of what I was remembering.
That's not my recollection. I do know that the mitigation that was described in the May board time was mitigation associated with the roads improvement plan.
Okay, all right. Couple of other questions is, as we were doing our work, and I really want to thank once again the members of our ad hoc. It's just the working group members have been just fantastic, and I'm imagine my colleagues would say the same thing about their volunteers, their folks. The upper area where the road is being proposed, consistent with where the county was, that seems, because we've walked that area and we've even walked it with staff, it seems to have been a pretty disturbed area. So I'm not anticipating, we weren't anticipating any kind of mitigation for that area. It didn't, certainly not riparian because it's a long ways from the creek, and habitat.
So when you're walking down the road going into the site from Bear Creek, everything that is on the right-hand side, the mitigation that would be required is any tree removal. So that will be that's going to be a county permit requirement for any tree removal, and that will come with mitigation. Everything to the left-hand side, it goes down to the creek, has the potential to be impacting riparian. There is a chance that that is riparian. That's what the delineation today will let us know, is where is that delineation? When does it stop becoming riparian and become upland areas? In which case, if we do tree removal, we're just looking at a tree removal permit and that associated mitigation. We're not having to mitigate for impacts to riparian if we're outside that riparian area. The oak trees that are there are valley oaks, and it has been designated as a sensitive natural community. For valley oaks, it's not about the understory or about the necessary habitat, but it's about the tree cover, what percent of the area is covered by trees. For valley oaks to be considered a sensitive natural community, at least 50% of the area needs to be covered. The tree canopy has to be of valley oaks, which it does meet that criteria.
Okay, and how did staff, Susanna, how does staff anticipate this going? Like, do you want to, Kurt's had a chance, I've had a chance, Craig should have a chance, of course, and then should we go to the members of the working groups, or how would you like to manage this?
Yeah, so we anticipated the board member will have questions, and then we also invite the working group representative to ask questions or provide feedback. And then we can go to the public comments for everyone else that attended the meeting to make their comment if they wish,
And so,
and people online.
and so anybody who's here as representatives of the working groups, if they just raise their hand, they're welcome to speak.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right, terrific. Back to you, Chair.
Okay, yeah, let's go ahead to the members of the working group who are seated here. Any questions?
Nancy Cole, Fundraising and Partnership. I just would like maybe a discussion and some clarification. You talked about doing mitigation and actually transferring the mitigation, you called it handling it elsewhere. What is the terminology when you mitigate, but you do the correction in another location?
So there is on-site mitigation, which usually happens directly on-site where the impact is happening. There's off-site mitigation, which means that you are away from the area. Now, when we were to go look at the site and figure out where we'd want to do mitigation, it would be very close by. It would still be considered on-site mitigation, but it probably would not be within the stables area. It might be on the other side of the riparian area. Maybe we'll expand over there. We'd have to go and do some scouting to see where we might be able to do tree plantings and create new habitat. That is that specific mitigation that we're trying to go for. So for the sensitive natural communities or for tree plantings, they cannot, if it was a 10-to-1 ratio, there's no way we're going to get 10 trees to 1 for the number of trees that we're removing from the site from the Bear Creek Stables area. So we would probably propose on the other side where we're doing the new north parking lot area, we might look at that area to see if we can mitigate over there, put the mitigation plantings there. We also had, as I described, a tree farm in which we did a removal of the tree farm. We're continuing that removal as we speak, actually. We're doing another about 5 acres of Douglas fir that were Christmas trees left behind that we're removing. And that site definitely has the ability to take the mitigation trees. And so most likely that's where we would want to put it, is at that site. That way it's not impacted on the stables. You don't have to worry about impacting that or going into a mitigation site and doing anything like that. We have it all in one area, and it makes it much easier and also much more cost effective to have all of our mitigation at one location. So putting it there is probably the best idea.
Well, I want to go a step further. I would appreciate some clarification. When we did the triangle and we're concerned about, the environment part, and then the public part, and then the funding part, we've seen constraints with the space at the stables and qualifying because of the limited space. Could you explain how it works that we're constrained by the bat boxes, but they came from the Alma College project, but yet they're affecting the use of the land at the stables?
So at the time of the development of the preserve plan, that area was not designated as part of the stables area. And so that's why it was decided that that would be a place that we could put the bats, because it was considered an area that was outside of the stable area.
Well, apparently we don't really have a clear definition of where the stables area is. But if we lose space like we did with the bat situation, then it would seem like we could take space somewhere else that might not have been indicated.
Yes, you could do that. We just have to make sure that we understand that by increasing our footprint, that there's potential for more impacts to natural resources. So as the stables area would grow, you're going to have more impacts on the natural resources. And it's just something that we need to think about and just be fully aware. So that way, when we decide to, if we're trying to have a net zero effect on the area, that we have the areas to do restoration work or mitigation work.
Would it be growing if you were just exchanging one place that was the stables that's been transferred, then it's not really growing?
I'm not sure if I quite understand. So, the stables area does have a defined lease area, which is a boundary that's within what is leased out as the stables area. And so if you're talking about potentially reducing or expanding areas outside of that, then we'd want to be looking at that for the natural resources impacts or potential natural resources impacts. And that is at the discretion of the board, right? So, we had talked about, or Mark had talked about that in 2015, 2016, the board had decided to not go with a certain option, which was that upper portion where the bout houses are at. And so we'd have to re-examine that. Do we want to make that trade-off of the natural resources values that are at that site for the stables operations?
Like, could the bat situation be relocated so we could restore that usable land that has been the stables land?
So you could do that. Just know that when that happens, that was a mitigation. And when you do mitigation and you get approval from a regulatory agency and you're now going to impact that mitigation, you're now going to have to do mitigation on top of the mitigation. So we would have to mitigate for the impacts to those bats twice over.
Right.
So it totally could.
Yeah.
It's something that we can do. It's something we can look at. We do know that those bat houses are heavily occupied and are being used by bats currently. They were situated outside of the lease area for the Bear Creek stables. And so that would have to be at the discretion of the board.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted our committee to know that we're talking about constraints and restrictions on our land. And I just want people to be aware that we might have an option in that space because the Alma College project, affected the stables project.
Okay, do we have other questions from the working group members?
Cody, thank you very much, because what you have informed us of has been very enlightening. I don't have a lot of questions for you. I probably do, but I'll get back to you with them. I'm going to go back to Mark, please. And
Thanks, Cody.
so a couple, I'm a roadway fan. The drawings all show a 20-foot roadway that we're proposing. We were counting that as a 16 plus 2 and 2 to make 20. You're counting it as 20 plus 2 and 2 to make 24. I'm quite sure that some negotiations on that and what the fire marshal really wants can probably get us to an easy solution on that. Everything that we've looked at says that 1-to-1 is an acceptable slope. You're pushing back saying 2-to-1. I'm going to go one step further and go, what happens when my contractor comes in there with his nice big excavator and he hits solid rock and the equipment can't remove anything because it's not moving. Can we put a vertical wall in there of rock and leave it and not have to do the stuff up above? And part of the reason I asked this is your trail guys were working down on the new trail extension, and I'm listening to them down there trying to scrape out 6 or 8 inches to get their trail width, and they're digging in pretty hard sandstone. So I think we do want to look at that a little bit, and I'd like you to make some comments on that.
Sure, appreciate that. Thank you, Mike. I'll just say, in terms of the roadway widths, and also the percent, slope of, any cut slopes that we're contemplating adjacent to the roadways, um, those requirements are very much dictated by the county and not by the district. And so, we could potentially go back to the county and have those conversations, with them, but that's our understanding of their current, ordinances and regulations. In terms of, finding sort of unexpected subsurface conditions, you alluded to, the potential for bedrock. I'm not personally aware, Jay, I don't know if we're aware of outcroppings in the area, but certainly if we were to uncover an unexpected condition like that, then I think potentially accommodations could be made. Do you have anything else you want?
Yeah, Jalen, engineering and construction manager. Like Mark said, it is mostly dictated by the county's ordinance and their grading guidelines about the slope, the 1-to-1, the 2-to-1 cut. County's guideline does say 2-to-1, so our cross section shows that. In terms of the existing geotech conditions, you're right. But if we move forward with this option, we need to do more geotech studies around that. But based on the geotech study that we performed to date, 2017 and 2020, it does show a lot of landslide, residual soil at the site rather than solid rock. Mark alluded to landslide in this area earlier. Most of the material we found at the site is not rock, and we would need slope stability or other geotech means to do the 1-to-1 cut you're referring to, or do a retaining wall structure that the county is sort of asking for in their ordinance and their grading guidelines.
On here. The other comment that I have is I know you commented about the slope of the roadways. I think I did a simple engineering test on them, and I did not find anything that was close to the 15%, which was part of the reason that we keep driving back to compressed aggregate base, no pavement. I understand, yes, if you have an ADA parking spot or something, that has to be a paved area. But, when we're looking at $500,000 worth of paving versus maybe $100,000 worth of paving, that's a huge difference to us. And so those are the areas that I would look at, and we'll probably come up with some other ones before we're done.
I appreciate that, Mike, and I'll just add that staff has not yet done a recent analysis of the slopes along the existing roadways. It's great that you're contemplating that. If in fact they are under 15%, then there is the potential for the use of gravel, still subject to county approval, but there is the potential for the use of the gravel. And as you said, there is still as we've discussed tonight, there is still the need to treat any runoff from compacted gravel surfaces for stormwater reasons.
I want to chime in on that a little bit too. I think it's a good idea. We could explore that with the county. One thing we should note is that there are trade-offs. If you kind of look at a pavement section, I don't want to kind of nerd out on pavement, but usually you have an AC section, you have your AB section. That makes up a structural pavement section. So when the county reviews this, they look at the section as a whole depth. So if we were to say we're paving 3 inches of asphalt on 6 inches of aggregate base, that's 9. If you were to do straight aggregate base, you might be deeper. You might be going 12, maybe 15. That's a lot more grading. there are trade-offs there, right? So that kind of calculation is something our civil engineer need to provide to the county as part of the approval to handle the loading of their fire trucks. But it is a good consideration and we can consider that. It's just there are trade-offs there.
Sorry. Pam Warren, I don't want to have my back to you. Thank you. One of the things I think you talked about were making the structures a little more robust, as they're all occupancy type U right now, and they may require fire sprinklers. The items that we've talked about are all under 500 square feet. So in the urban wildlife interface, they're not required to be sprinklered. Also, we're also asking that making the hay barn, the hay barn, and the tractor barn less than 500 square feet should not trigger sprinklers. We're hoping that you understood that that was one of the reasons of keeping these structures smaller. Also, I think for economy of scale, looking in what we've talked to more barn managers is having, this might not be for you, but having smaller hay structures in more locations is more convenient. We have hay that doesn't go bad quite so soon. We buy hay more often, so there's not the idea of stale hay or rotten hay. We're hoping to repurpose the high bay barn for tractor storage. So the satellite areas that we do provide would just be strictly for hay only, as well as right now, from what I have calculated on site, we have about 1,100 square feet of storage, including the high bay barn and the hay barn. They're not used for hay. We don't use nearly that many square feet for hay. So we're hoping that that would be a consideration.
Thank you for those comments, Pam. We appreciate them.
Just one other comment on the hay barn. The one that was proposed was 25 feet tall, 20 or 25 feet tall. That's like an agricultural storage barn. Anybody that goes into one of those barns to try and work on it hits a major safety hazard of anything up over about 12 feet. So that's another reason that we've recommended going to about a 16-foot high. And 16-foot high still has like 3 or 4 foot of open space at the top for when the guy comes in with a squeeze. A squeeze is a mechanical piece of equipment that they bring a semi-load of hay in, which can be 5 or 6 squeeze drops. They have a forklift that comes in with it. They pick it up, they drop it in. The squeeze is about 10 foot high. And so you want to have access that he can get in there and work to it. But going 2 stacks high is really a safety hazard. And in all the calculations we've done with even 72 horses in there, we don't see a need for anything as large as was proposed.
Thank you for that as well, Mike. We very much appreciate your experience and expertise with these types of structures.
I have a question for Cody. What would a typical project like this for tree removable that have you seen in the past? Creating a new roadway. Evidently, the roadway that we were suggesting in the current drawings does not meet the fire marshal requirement. So something has to give, right?
Yep.
The fire marshal's not happy, we don't have a project.
Yep.
I'm sure someone has been probably thinking around those lines so far, but in your experience and in the many projects you've done for Midpen and you're building a new roadway or improving a roadway, what kind of tree mitigation have you done in the past? And I guess my question is specifically the ratios. It seemed like when you presented ratios, there was quite a wide gamut there of things that were required or not required. And so just I'm asking from what you've seen in the past, what's been your normal course?
Yeah, so for your typical tree, so this is a tree that is going to be mitigated from a county's perspective. It's a larger tree and they want to see it replaced. It can range anywhere from 1 to 1 if it's a non-native species. So if it's an invasive species, it's defined as invasive like a eucalyptus tree or something like that. We will always make the argument that this should be replaced 1 to 1 with a native species. And for the most part, there's almost never pushback on that. Typical ratios, though, are 3 to 1, 5 to 1, 6 to 1, 8 to 1, 15 to 1. It really depends on the tree species. It depends on the site location. It also depends on our relationship with the permitting agency and showing them that we did everything we could to reduce the number of trees that we were trying to do. So showing them that we did minimize the mitigation by reducing the number of trees we did. So a lot of it is about relationships, but it widely ranges.
I'm going to ask one more question.
Mhm.
When we look at the diagram on the upper part, there are some trees now in the steeper areas,
Mhm.
they're tagged. You can see tree tags on them, and they are brown, crisp, ready to go trees, sadly. We also have a couple what look to be quite mature oak trees that look like they really have some blight suffering. If a tree is not in healthy condition, well, some of them sadly are clearly goners, but some of them look like they're on their way as well. Does that factor into your equations? Because
Yes.
it does. All
It
right.
does factor into it. So if a tree is truly dead, we typically do not need to mitigate for that. And that's something that we will argue with them. A tree that is suffering from some sort of disease or something like that, we can offer that. That one's a little bit more iffy, but a true dead tree, yes, we won't have to mitigate for that. One thing to keep in mind, we do have deciduous trees out at this site. Some are what we call summer deciduous, meaning that they lose all their leaves at this time of year, and then they'll pop right back up. And then valley oaks also will lose their leaves. So there's a potential that they would come back. We could go out and we would do tests to see if they're actually dead or not before removal and make that argument with the regulatory agencies.
Are there any more questions from the working group members here? Kristen.
Hi, this is Kristen Reichmuth. And thank you for all of your work and patience that you have for all of us trying to save this amazing piece of property that holds so much history. I'm not, I'm part of the operations group, but the work that has been done with facilities is phenomenal. And I'm hearing a lot of words such as could be and considered, and it's not exact. And with the slide that was presented with the trees and what would need to be taken out, that was kind of, or it seemed to me that if that's associated with this presentation, that this would be more for our space, but it's kind of, it's not. So I'm wondering if it's possible to actually for both Mark and Cody to provide some more detailed and exact numbers. And like with the 15% that was just mentioned with Mike, you know, it could be, we haven't been out yet. I'm wondering if and when we can get that, and
So-
hopefully before November.
So typically, when we're at this stage of a planning, it is extremely hard without knowing exactly what we're doing and how we're doing it. So with the road work, it's really going to depend on how big that road is, if we have to cut into the side, how many trees will be taken out. The estimate right now is between 10 and 30 trees. That's what I can tell you for just for the road removal. So between 10 and 30 trees, but it's really going to come down to the actual site design. And at the conceptual level, it's really hard to give you an exact number. We're hoping to provide some of that information. Like I said, we have biologists out there right now who are doing the riparian delineation, so we can see exactly where the riparian area is, and do they overlap with any areas that you are proposing to do a different use in that area? Because that's where we'll see the impacts to the jurisdictional area. So it's extremely hard at a conceptual level to be able to give you exact numbers. I cannot give you exact numbers on the ratio, success criteria, or monitoring timeline. That is at the discretion of regulatory agencies, and that is when we go to permitting. Not a satisfying answer, I know.
Thank you for your answer. I would like to actually ask though, I mean, if we are working so hard to present a feasible presentation to the entire board in November, but we are swaying so far financially with what could be, and it could be considered. It's kind of, it seems a little bit difficult for me to be successful if I don't feel that I'm getting more clear answers from staff, right? I'm hoping. Thank you.
So first, I want to express my sympathies, because this is the type of work that we do all the time. And even in this project itself, throughout the planning process, I've been like, what? We can't do that. We have to spend this much money on that. It is frustrating. And probably the most frustrating thing is what you've identified is the county won't say for sure yes or no until you put in that application. The regulatory agencies, Fish and Wildlife, they won't tell you exactly what you have to do until you apply for it. So what we look to do, and what I would suggest for you, is to minimize footprints, reduce and not remove as many trees as possible. Some of your strategies, have some possibilities like minimizing, not necessarily reusing old buildings that would take a lot of investment to redo, but maybe new structures that minimize your fire sprinkler requirements and permitting requirements. I mean, those are the kind of things that I think will give us, even though you don't have for sure answers, if you use this general criteria of the bigger their footprint, the more trees you remove, right, that's going to cost more because you have more mitigation. We're not going to know the exact numbers, both for the, it was estimated for the repair project, and we're trying to kind of give an idea for, the proposals that you're bringing forward. So big picture, I just understand the frustration because we go through that on every project. And then the strategy we use to deal with it is to just try to use those, to minimize the footprint, reduce the potential impacts to the natural resources. Then you're going to have less money spent on mitigation. So just, it's not a great answer, right? But that's the answer that we get all the time as we're trying to move these things forward.
If I could just follow up really quickly, the number that I gave that was back in May was based off of our best estimate about what we think are going to be the mitigation requirements for the site. I have held off on doing new calculations based off of what you guys are presenting, because we're still sort of waiting to hear about what you guys are looking for to be able to do that analysis for you all and to provide a better new estimate. But it's always going to be an estimate until we put those permits in.
Kristen Regmuth, thank you. I'm curious though, and again, I look at this November date as the deadline. We present everything, but we don't really know. And it would be helpful if there were estimates. So for just a ballpark, and is it possible for staff to work with the facilities group, and to chat and how much would this cost? Can we get an estimate so that we can present a more accurate presentation? Is that, and the same goes with the road, and is that possible? And then also, I'm going to put it on record. It's been on record before, but I was sandwiched in between a horse and asphalt in Woodside. I had to go over a small section from one trail to another. The horse slipped, and I had a split second to decide if I was going to bail or land it. And I decided to just curl up and land it. And it was one of the scariest moments of my life. And I'm lucky that I can walk. So avoiding the asphalt as much as possible is important. And then I'm looking at the comment about the ADA and asphalt, and it made me think of Deer Hollow. And I don't remember seeing asphalt where the ADA parking is, even close to where Deer Hollow is. So, and Windy Hill. So why would that be? Would there be different requirements for us for some reason or another?
That's not a biologic question.
Your observation is accurate. At some of the existing preserves, our ADA parking area is not paved. However, the district have we call the ADA transition plans, and a few years ago, it's required by the federal government. Each government agencies have to evaluate our facility and to identify any deficiencies in terms of ADA compliance. And then we have to come up with a plan to bring all those, eliminate those deficiencies and bring our facility to meet current standards. So the federal government recognized that in a lot of cases, it's a very huge investment for agencies to meet those requirements. So they allow agencies to come up with a plan to bring our facility to meet requirement over time. So for the district, we have a 15-year plan to meet that requirement, and we are in the process of implementing those improvements at one reserve at a time. So, and that's why some of your observation, like I said, I confirming some of your observation, but I also want to know we are in the process of updating some of the ADA parking area to make them to pave them so they can make current standards. And I also want to address your ask about providing some more concrete information to help you formulate your recommendations. And I think staff will try our best to do it. Right now, we just received some of the ideas that from the design group, and that's why we are here today to provide you some preliminary feedbacks and to point out some of the trade-off on some of the ideas that you come up with, not to tell you you can or cannot do a certain what options, but we're here to point out the trade-off. And once you take our feedback back, and I assume that the working group will work to fine-tune, refine your recommendations. And once you have a firm recommendations, and staff can take those information to do some analysis, maybe to provide some estimates on the potential impacts on the natural environment, and maybe to take a look at the potential costs of that proposal, what the cost is, so that you can bring that with you when you bring to the board, when you present those options with the board. But we do need time, and right now we really do not have a firm recommendations from the working group yet. Right?
I'd like to make a suggestion that I think Kristen asked a really good question, which kind of gets to what process are we going to use, and that's part of the real discussion that we want to have. So I'm wondering if we should maybe take public comment, and then I think the directors are going to have commentary on this item and that discussion about process.
Yeah. So we do have item number 3 to talk about the process, to how we can go from here to November 20th. Yeah.
That's great. And then I have a comment or a question about the parking. I understand that. Would you mind going back to the slide that showed additional parking spaces in the lower area? That one. There you go. I understand that there could be, I think it was, what was the terminology from Mark? The dispersed, and that there would be equal yet possibly more fees. But if these are spaces that were designated ADA parking spaces, would this fall within the category of compliance and meeting requirements and deficiency? And would that, wouldn't there be extra funds available for that if we are trying to meet ADA compliance? And I'm curious.
Yeah, as I understand the question, you know, potentially, again, I don't think I actually mentioned it earlier, but in the context of this slide, you know, there is it does seem like there's an apparent reduction in the number of parking spaces that are currently proposed on the focus working group site plan versus what was contemplated in the repair plan. I think we had 13 spaces, I believe, Jay, associated with the repair plan on the right. And then, you know, by our count, that I believe is like 6 to 8 spaces contemplated in the focus working group plan. Certainly, some number of those spaces would need to be ADA compliant in order to meet ADA requirements on the site. I think, Jay, that's typically a ratio of the overall number of parking spaces that we're providing, correct? So I don't know if you have other thoughts on that you want to share.
Right. I think Mark kind of hit the point there. We do require parking, and anytime we have parking stalls, a certain ratio needs to be ADA parking stalls. And I think it's 25-1, something along those lines for the ratio. Yes. Susanna, can you? Okay.
I'm just confirming what you said, yes. So for the parking area, number of parkings that we're contemplating for this site, and we're looking at like 2 ADA parking spots.
Can Jay make a comment on where the original 13 came from, please?
Gretchen Louston, Senior Planner. I can provide more detail about the specific number that was required. The county, there was a county requirement of a number of spaces based on the number of boarded horses at the site. And based on the site available and what could be built in that area while maximizing parking was what is shown here in the repair plan, which is approximately 13, let's say. And through a exception process with the county, we submitted documentation to ask for an allowance here that we could reduce the number of parking spaces. So it doesn't even meet the county requirement. We've asked for a reduction in the required parking, while at the same time realizing that one of the goals of the Bear Creek Stable Site Plan was to maximize public access. And with that, in this area, you do need to provide parking for the public as well. So it was really a balancing act between what the county would require and what we thought that we could accommodate at the site in terms of the space.
Thank you. I think the boarding area needed about 25 sites total, plus some other, and in the dispersed mode that we had, we took most of the parking out of the operation area and pushed it to other places as dispersed parking.
Yeah.
We easily met the county requirement, so that variance would not have to be submitted if we maintained what we're looking at.
Yeah, and we really appreciate that, creativity. With the repair plan, we were focusing all of our work in that lower area. And so all of the parking then needed to be accommodated in that first phase of work in the lower area with the intention that we were not sure when additional improvements would be made to that upper border area. So to keep everything in that lower area. And then just as Mark mentioned earlier, one of the primary concerns that we have heard is really trying to minimize vehicular traffic, especially from the general public coming into the site. So having members of the public, if they're bringing their child to programming, to come down the main road, park right there at the entrance of the stable, not have to make any, circular moves around any of the access pathways around the stables, and then to be able to leave immediately. So that was really a deliberate action to try to put all of that parking in one area at the front of the stables.
So I think this is all good discussion, and I think that it is the type of discussion that needs to take place between Midpen staff and the working group. But I think we, we also need to move the meeting on. So I'm going to take Director Holman's question, and then we'll go to public comment.
I don't know if I'm the only one that has questions or not, but I do have a few actually. Let me find them. Yeah, I have a broad question, and maybe it's more appropriate to Cody, but I can't swear to that. You know, one of the charges of the stables, consistent with Midpen's mission over there about ecologically sensitive public access, would indicate increased programming from what's there now at this site. And so I don't think I'm hearing this, but I also make sure that you give staff an opportunity to respond. There was a lot of programming that took place at the stables that I didn't even know about until we started this process. So I didn't know that there were farm animals. I didn't know there was like a kiddie area for programming. I didn't know any of that existed. And what's coming forward in this process that I'm learning from my group and from other groups is that there's a real interest in supporting the vision for the stables and also restoring some of those public uses. And I just want to make sure we're not caught in some kind of a, you know, damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of situation, where it's like we're trying to restore those, but we're being penalized because it takes up more space and requires more of this, more of that, which could be interpreted as impacts. I mean, a lot of the site is disturbed, but I just want to make sure we have an understanding that, at least as I'm hearing it, that there's a lot of effort to try to restore some of those uses in the public access part that's a part of the requirement for this. So can staff comment on that? It's like, I don't want us to get us caught between some kind of betwixt and between thing here.
Yeah, and I think I'd like to just provide a little bit of background just about the preserve plan, site plan that was approved in 2017. And right now, as staff, we're just trying to provide guidance to keep the group within the envelope of the improvement area that was approved as part of the preserve plan. Certainly, additional considerations could be brought to the full board. We'll continue, though, to let you know where that envelope was with the approved site plan. And we can also at another time kind of share the process of those different alternatives that were considered and eliminated from consideration. And so that's where we're just trying to bring an awareness of the area that for now is designated as the improvement area of the stables in alignment with the preserve plan.
Thank you. And then maybe this is more of a comment, but it's sort of a question too. I can appreciate that staff is kind of in this betwixt and between too, because you have a lot more history with this than, well, not the public. I understand the public's been involved in this for, 15 years or more, maybe. They'd have to speak to that themselves, but a long time. But staff's been involved in this for a long time. Some of us, Director Gleason and I, not so long. But I know that, well, I struggle sometimes. I really struggle, and Susanna would know this, Brian would know this, with, providing access to a preserve requires parking and parking lots. And I really have to cringe sometimes at the cost factor. And Susanna's nodding her head like I really, at the cost factor and the impact on the natural environment. At the same time, it's like you want to provide public access. And I know from the board meeting in May that the number of people able to enjoy the stables is a consideration of some board members at least. because they don't want to put X number of $1 million into something that's going to be enjoyed by, I'm going to make up a number here, 50 people. It's a totally made up number. So that's the other, how is staff looking at that and trying to balance this? So I hear the constraint about that upper area wasn't included in the plan, but you know, for it to be worth the financial investment, we need to get programming. And how is staff dealing with that? That'll help us look at this too. Susanna, Susanna knows how much I struggle with.
I mean, so that's the quandary, right? So staff developed the best plan that to meet those goals, and it ended up being more expensive. The board had the option right at the May meeting to say, we're going to go ahead and move forward with $10 million project and do it. So that's the quandary. So in developing plans, I think it'd be good to have intermediate options, because yes, if you kept the same number of boarding or you know, historic number of boarding horses and increase the programming, your permit requirements are going to go up and the project is going to get more expensive. Now there could be some trading in back and forth, like maybe you do less boarding and more programming if that works for the board, and maybe you can come up to a dollar figure that's workable. But there is a relationship about the amount of boarding and the amount of programming and how much it's going to cost. And we had some discussions at the last ad hoc meeting in the breakout groups about, oh, could we have bigger, more people involved in programming that's allowed under the current concessionaires agreement. So the current concessionaires agreement was made to conform to the existing use. And when we were permitting, we were staying within those existing uses because we didn't want to expand the scope of the project. So we're struggling with those issues. And that's kind of why we're here, right? We're trying to figure out what's acceptable to the community and then ultimately to the board to balance those uses and is acceptable as far as the funding committed to it.
So I'm going to be bold enough to say, so let us help you with that struggle.
Yeah, yes. Please do. Sure.
I just want to add that it's our constant struggle because the 3 prongs are our missions, and as everything else we're doing, we're always trying to strike that balance and we want to look at and any options we look at maximize the benefits of public access, also minimize the impacts to the natural environment. So that is kind of the constant struggle we have, but then it's also a challenge that we have met in all the other work they're doing. And we feel like the district has been doing a great job of strike that right balance. And that's why we're here and we're trying to do that as well with the help from the community.
And Cody, you had something?
Just a really quick thing to let people know for staff, we do not develop projects or programs in a vacuum. We're always looking at both our mission, but we're also getting direction from the board, typically through our resource management policies, our good neighbor policies, and through our CEQA documentation. So all of our suggestions, our recommendations are based off of what the board has directed us in the past in terms of policy. And also through the site planning through that process. So none of these are done in a vacuum. We don't just make up an idea and present to the board. We are definitely looking at the mission, at our resource management policies, and bringing that forward to the board members to make a policy decision, which is what we're at now, a policy decision. We have to weigh we have 3 parts of our mission. We have to weigh those. I'm a biologist, so I'm going to be advocating for the natural environment, but also the ecologically sensitive public enjoyment. I understand that, and I really do appreciate that, and that's where we do need your help, is to figure out what that balance is. That's a policy decision.
I'll have some comments later, and I think I have a couple of them are actually questions, but and the chair's wanting to move on.
Yeah. Do we have any public comment? Bob Alexander.
Is my mic a spot? All right, I want to comment first of all at what I see as pretty good consistency, parallelism to staff's consultation and the site design measures that we're discussing in the working group and our sensitivity to the ecological concerns, biological swales and using the terms of C3, C.3, and we've discussed amongst ourselves, keeping ourselves in line and consistent with that approach. By letter of the law, it may not be, total compliance, but, directionally and from a priority perspective, we're very much, keen and following that and pursuing that. So, so likewise, some of these other, some of the areas that we've discussed, we're necessarily sort of focusing on those areas where we're requiring or needing a little bit of clarification. And so this feedback session is very productive for us. So we hope to be able to reflect that back and give you something that a little bit more consistent and executable. I had one specific question, and that is the repair plan. Have we seen costing on it? We know the public domain 2017, we know there was a good deal, and we have, pretty rigorous costing on. Do we have the same for the repair plan?
Finish your comment before I respond to you?
No, I really, I mean, the discussion's been pretty detailed and fairly well exhaustive. So many of my initial questions have already been answered. So really, just leaving that thought of being consistent and trying to produce product that's executable, for you. And this feedback is very helpful. So I'll just reiterate that. And no, the costing approach on the repair plan, if we could understand that a little bit better.
But Bob, before you leave, you mentioned C3. You might say more about what C3 is for everybody.
Well, C3 is a specification. It's been adopted multi-county by title. It's the stormwater handbook. And what it does is it gives us mitigation, or I'm going to use that word actually in this room. I can't use that word, but it gives us conditions and guidelines and best practices so that our site considerations are more ecologically sound. So. Okay.
If you have a quick response to the question, sure.
Jalen, Engineering and Construction Manager. Responding to Bob's question, do we have a cost estimate? We do. It is one that is dated January in 2020, and that's when we presented to the board. And as we mentioned in the May meeting, we use that estimate and we use an escalation factor to construction date of 2027 to set the baseline for the cost estimate, simply because we all went through this phase of escalation, inflation era. 5 to 6% is actually pretty generous to use as a baseline off of that 2020 estimate. So that's our baseline. And it is in one of the board reports that we have as a public document that I could share with the group if desired.
Number we pitch back.
Right. Thanks. Maria, was there any online?
I do have one online, Mike Bunsick.
Okay.
Mr. Bunsick, if you can unmute yourself, please.
Good evening, everyone. You got me?
Yep, you have 3 minutes.
Yeah, I just there's a lot of discussion on parking, and I want to reference, if I'm correct, there is a approved plan for a fairly large parking area, which is not a long distance from the stable site. And there's also a lot of work on the adjoining trail system in the preserve, and I'm just curious how that would fit into here, especially when you're talking about trying to draw the general public for a greater value in the stables and in the review. So I'd like to hear something about that. I'll take the rest offline.
Yeah, maybe just quick comment on.
Yes, thank you for the question. That's one thing we didn't get to in our presentation, but yes, there's active planning going on for what's referred to as the Bear Creek Redwoods North parking lot, which is just to the north of the stable site. And so we've heard some great discussion and ideas about the potential to combine the public parking there with the stable site. A couple things to note about that is that that site is located by trail distance approximately a half a mile away from the stable site. So that does present access limitations in that anyone who is parking there would need to walk a half a mile into the site. There's also ADA limitations to that approach as well, because ADA vehicular access and parking would still be necessary at the stable itself in order to accommodate users with disabilities. In addition, the intention of the Bear Creek North parking lot site was really to preserve visitors who were coming to enjoy the remainder of the trails throughout the preserve and not just the stable site. So we would have to consider the balancing of those numbers of users and how many spaces could be accommodated at that site.
I do not have
No,
any more. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so let's go to discussion on this item now. And I haven't said much. I wanted to make some comments and give some of my perspective on this. I think from the operations and programming perspective, one thing that we've seen is that we feel there's a lot of flexibility, and that when we think in terms of what does it take to do different programs, it's been more discussion about what individual features are required and not so much where they are or how exactly they fit together. And for sure, you could put together different site plans where you identify advantages or disadvantages. But my sense is that we could put together a compelling suite of programs that is really good for Midpen and for the stables, almost with any site plan that we can imagine here that has these basic components, right? We need the arena, we need some of the round pens, and we can argue about what sizes they are. We've talked about having shelter, shade, and so forth, but those aren't really specifics of the exact site layout. So I think there is a lot of flexibility there. And then the other thing is we put together this financial analysis where we were trying to understand what does it look like if you have the sort of the small, very small occupancy of the stables as we have now, or the large one. And I think there's some flexibility there too. So I feel like we need to get into a discussion that's a tighter discussion with the staff, where particularly the site planning team can get their ideas out there and really understand these constraints and figure out, are there ways to apply these good ideas that you've come up with. But maybe now we've got a better idea of some of the constraints and the implications of doing different things. Maybe some of those ideas can be applied in ways that are maybe less disruptive to the previous plan, or less costly and so forth. And I think some of those, there are ideas that have come up. For example, the small hay barns is one of them, right? You could potentially apply that idea to any site plan, and maybe in some cases it's a bigger change, in some cases more incremental. I think there are a whole bunch of ideas that have come out of that working group where this can be discussed. And another set that I don't think has been talked about tonight is staging, where, for example, one of the ideas was, instead of renovating the Tevis barn, stabilize the Tevis barn and then make any further work contingent on fundraising, right? And as far as I can tell out of our working group, we haven't identified that the Tevis barn is going to be central to the success or failure of the stables. Exactly what you can do with it is not really figuring in those discussions. So I think there are ideas like that, that if the folks from the working group are having a closer discussion with folks from the Midpen staff, then maybe we can find a less disruptive plan that does save money and maybe has some of these staging ideas. And then can that help us come to a maybe a smaller plan that we can put together or put in front of the board, right? So those are some of my ideas at this point.
Suzanne, could you go back to the original agenda?
Original agenda. Okay.
Because we're 2 hours in.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
wondering if we can get out of here before 10. So
So
we are on step C.
yes, yes. If you concerned about time, what I can suggest is that item D, clarification on contracting requirement, operation assumptions, we can actually provide those informations in writing. And really just to help you continue to refine your ideas, because of this, as part of your efforts and to reduce project costs, to reduce ongoing operating costs, and utilizing volunteer has come up in many areas. And there's questions associated with how to use volunteers and what kind of requirements. So this item is really to help answer some of those questions.
Right.
But we can provide those questions and also the response in writing to the working groups. Then we can move on to the last topic if you wish.
Okay. So my suggestion, Chair, if you think it would be efficient for staff to at least hit the highlights of item D, I mean, you've got all of us here, it's real time. And maybe if we promise to listen and absorb, and thank you very much, maybe clarifying questions. But then we really move on to F, which I think is a very key topic that we need to discuss. So I'll maybe leave it to your judgment. If you think you can do that via email, that's fine. But I'm just wondering, it might be worth presenting at least the highlights just to.
Yeah, and especially, I will happy to cover that. And with the help from Hillary, and we have Hillary here to help us answer some of those questions.
So I'll leave it to my colleagues if how you feel about that. I'm just.
How long do you expect that presentation pieces?
If you have no questions, then can go very fast.
Okay, then let's do it, and we'll restrain ourselves with respect to questions.
Okay, then I will go. All right. So as I mentioned, so there's the utilizing volunteers for to support projects and support operations had come up, and I identified 3 questions related to that. And then we want to provide some responses to those questions to help you as you continue to look into those options. So the first question is, what are the requirements if facility improvement are performed by volunteers? So I have to say we have not done this type of volunteering work before. I think it's doable. However, we wanted to make sure that because all the improvement that will be conducted or carry out in our preserve, it's for public facility, and public safety is most important. So we want to make sure that whoever that is performing the work need to be licensed and they need to have the insurance, meets the district's insurance requirements. And they also have to have the experience that they can perform that type of work. And usually, typically, when district do facility improvement, and we have a set of plans and specifications to direct the contractor what they need to do, and then we'll be expecting the volunteers who performing the work to meet those plans and specifications. So that's for that questions. And the second question is, in addition to labor, how about donating other services? And we just use an example here, off-hauling debris with personal trucks. So the answer is very similar. We can consider that as long as the individuals or the teams that are offering that service meets the requirements, meets the insurance requirement, meets the qualifications, and have the knowledge about how to handle different type of materials, how to handle them, how to dispose them. So as long as they meet those requirements, we can consider that. And then the last question is, if the stable are managed by a nonprofit organization, do they have to follow contracting requirements that are typical for government agencies? So that's a very, very good question. And I'm actually going to ask Hillary to come up to help me answer that question.
Hi, Hillary Stevenson, General Counsel. In order to most clearly answer this question, I'll first just start by saying that the same requirements that we currently require of our existing concessionaire would apply to any other entity, whether it be a for-profit or a nonprofit entity that's doing work on the site or operating the site. So for those of you who have reviewed those requirements or familiar with what is required of the concessionaire, essentially, whether it's a nonprofit or a contractor, we require payment of prevailing wage. We require contractors to be licensed and follow the license laws. And we require anyone who's doing operations on the site to meet the district's insurance requirements. I'm trying to imagine other contracting requirements. If we're referring to like a low bid or a bidding process, what's set forth for public agencies in both our policies and in state law is really a practice around getting cost-effective contractors. So that exact process wouldn't need to be followed, but any prudent party who's trying to hire a contractor to do work would want to compare different bids and choose the contractor that's qualified and probably has the lowest bid. So there may not be too much of a difference between whether a nonprofit, for-profit, or the district ultimately is the one that's procuring those contracts. I hope that answers the question, and I'll stick around for a few minutes in case there's follow-up questions. Thanks.
Any urgent questions that related to those questions and responses that you wanted to?
I think one key part was you said that they would have to pay prevailing wage, right? So it would be different than if they were working on their own land and contracting there.
That's correct. Yeah. And the exceptions to that are extremely narrow, so narrow that it's probably not worth covering them. There is a very specific exception for work performed by volunteers, but because of how we've answered these other questions, we wouldn't envision that some project at the stables would be performed entirely with volunteer labor. So those exceptions for prevailing wage wouldn't apply to this project. Hopefully that helps.
Director Holman?
Clarification on the second bullet here. Talks about off-hauling debris, for instance. So there's a lot of ivy growing on the Tevis barn, for instance. I'm a little puzzled. Is it like, so would you have to have a licensed person to pull the ivy off the Tevis barn and haul it away?
So I was referring to if we're handling some construction debris with potentially hazardous, and then we need license and need people that with experience and people that understand how to handle that kind of material. However, Cody actually, I forgot to mention, but Cody told me that some of those natural resources work, it's perfect candidate for volunteering work.
Yeah, just for volunteer work, a lot of the natural resources work we do is done by volunteers, either through district-led volunteers or through nonprofits such as Grassroots Ecology. That could be pulling weeds, that can be planting, maintaining plants, watering plants and such. Those are great opportunities and really speak to the education part of our mission. And so I really do like bringing volunteers in for that sort of resource management activities.
Very much appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so I can move on. So we also planned to take this opportunity to provide some feedbacks on the operation projections that was provided by the operations and programming group. I don't know if you would like us to provide that initial feedback here, or you want to skip that and then we can provide those feedbacks through written communications. So it's up to you.
Did you say this is put together by the operations group or this is staff? I'm not clear.
Operations.
This was shared from our group.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we could probably take this offline unless
Okay.
there's anything critical that you want to bring up.
Yeah, it's just initial feedbacks.
Okay,
Yeah.
sure.
Okay. All right. So then we can see if any public comments on that item. We have promised that we offer public comments opportunities.
We do not have any virtual comments.
All right.
Okay, let's go on then.
Okay. So now let's move on to our last topic. So we just wanted to take this opportunity to have a discussion with you to look at how to move forward and work together to arrive at the options that can forward to the full board. I think our general manager Anna Reese will lead this discussion, but before I turn the floor to her, I just want to provide just a couple slides just to kind of provide some context and so to help the discussions. The first one is I just want to remind everyone that the board direction that was given on May 14, and it's displayed here that it's exactly what the full board directed us to do. It's that the board directed the general manager to bring back this item, which the stable item, to the board in approximately 4 months, and to form an ad hoc committee with members of the board with different views, as well as members of the community that will be self-selecting that have the following experience, including operation and management, architect and engineering, also therapy programs, as well as fundraisings, including grants. And the board also wants staff to work with the directors to seek out support with county elected officials for the conditional use permits. So that was the board's directions. And then I also just want to remind the group the purpose and charge of this ad hoc committee. So the first one is pretty much consistent with what the board directed us to do, and to form this ad hoc committee with community members that have different experience. And then also for this group, we committed to evaluate and present options for full board consideration that are consistent with the board-approved Bear Creek Stable goals as outlined in the reserve plans, including protecting the site's natural resources, maximize public benefits, and also develop a viable plan that is financially feasible for both a tenant and the district. And then also we have committed to work with the elected officials to support the stables. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Anna.
Okay, so I hope that at least the first part of this meeting has been helpful to you all, because it felt like the various working groups were moving forward, and we were starting to see some probably points where we could provide some information to help you think through these scenarios that you're thinking about, so that you can arrive at an option that would be well vetted by the board in November. So with that said, let's talk about that. That's coming up pretty quickly. That's scheduled for towards the end of November. I'm gonna look at district clerk, November 20th. And we have that date now set, unless we need to move it, but that's our date. So, and you have to kind of work backwards, because we need at least a good solid 3 weeks to prepare the board report and input your information, so that we can have the reviews internally, and we can then print and post the packet for public distribution. So it's tight, which is why if I was starting to feel the urgency to have this this conversation. So thinking that now you have a limited time to really come to either an option or a set of options that you want to forward, we wanted us to remind you of both the goals that the board had set for the Bear Creek Stable site, the charge of the ad hoc committee. But let me also go back to the May meeting, because there were some concerns raised by the board that were talked about at that meeting that I also want you to be aware of and to think about and incorporate in how you develop your final option or options. And that includes the cost, the upfront cost for that at least first phase of repair. Think about that, because when we brought our updated cost estimate to the board, I think it was on the order of 8 to 10 million. Jay, is that right? 9.5 to 10 million. That felt very high to the board compared to what they had approved. And on top of that, the additional amount that they had allocate for that project. So that was a stress point for the board. That was a concern. Another concern has to do with the amount of staff capacity that we would need to allocate for the ongoing operation of the site to help with the management. I'm sure you're thinking of ways to reduce that, but that was another issue that the board was grappling with, is the amount of dedicated staff and allocations of staff time that we would need to place on an ongoing basis for the ongoing management of the site. Also was the other concern raised had to do with the management role for the agency for Midpen related to the site. And what type of ongoing management role, aside from staff, the day-to-day staff issues, maintenance, response, et cetera, that staff would have to do. But on top of that, what is that management role for the agency? And thinking about, for example, when issues come up, because issues will inevitably come up, what does that look like? To date, that's been a huge draw on both staff, but also it's trickled to the board, because many of those issues then come before the board, and it's created a very interesting and difficult type of circumstance and how to manage those issues. So that's another area of concern for the board. So keep those in mind, please, because I'm pretty sure that the board at large are going to be thinking about those and looking at the options before them to see how do these options address those concerns. That's really up to you to think about, because I know that's your charge, but keep those in mind. Now, the other thing too is there were talks about phasing. That is certainly one approach, and that could help move certain expenses for later phase improvements to another time when fundraising efforts and other sources of funding come in to be able to accomplish those. If you're thinking about phasing, my strong suggestion for you all is to think about that phase one very carefully, because that phase one has to contain enough repairs for the site to address the most outstanding issues. And that has to do with safety, that has to do with making sure that the site is operable, et cetera. So what are those highest of all priorities, operational priorities and needs that have to happen as part of that phase one repair? Let me think of it. And then also, I'm not sure where you are with your options, but at the last meeting, there were a lot of ideas. And so I'm not sure where you're coming down, but if you are proposing a very new repair plan, you're going to have to also think about a phase 1A. And I say that because it's going to take us about 3 years to start new. And by that, I mean enter into a new contract or amend the contract we have currently with our engineering firm to develop the new design plans and bring them all the way to 100% construction ready, to go through the permitting process with Santa Clara County. It's going to have to go through some levels of review by the board and perhaps some other reviews. And that just takes time. It just does. And so I'm thinking it's going to be about a 3-year time frame. So you're going to need a phase 1A that will carry us in the interim, so that that site remains operable and safe during those 3 years until we can actually implement the phase 1B repairs. So think about that too, is that if it is a real revamp of what has been proposed to date, then we're going to have that interim phase. Making sure I'm not forgetting anything else.
Anna, I think of one other one that you haven't addressed
Okay.
that I think the board was, and that is the number of public being served.
Yes, correct.
There was a real concern. It's the fact that I think somebody says, is this the good for 72 boarders, or is it
Right.
for the hopefully thousands of people that
Right. So
community people that
there is,
yeah.
yes, there is a strong interest that if significant funding is being invested in the site,
Right.
that there is a true broad public benefit.
Right.
And so certainly the programming that you've been thinking about, that's important. And as you're thinking about that programming, what is that phase 1, level of improvements that you need to have at least a certain level of programming that's meeting general broad public benefit? You can have future phases and, you can continue to add improvements, enhancements, et cetera. But what is that first level? And again, thinking about all of these goals and all the concerns that the board raised, what is that phase one, highest priority, must do as the first phase type of work. You can always present something much bigger with a much bigger price tag, et cetera. But I'm just offering you my suggestions to address the issues and the concerns and the goals that have been set so that you can be as successful as you can be with the options that you present before the board. But if you decide to go another route, you know, that will be your choice. It's just know that we're working within this framework. At least staff is certainly. And it's, I'm offering that to all of you to think about.
Other board questions or? I have a question. Yeah, okay. Anna, this, that's sobering, especially with the phase 1A, because I was going to kind of approach the phase idea because I kind of like that. But thank you for bringing us into reality. If we were to say, you know what, these all been really good ideas, but in effect, it's kind of a oops, start all over, you know, from a permitting issue, the 3 years, I think is what you were saying. Is there an argument to be made that we're already well into this from a permitting using the, what do we call it? The repair option? Is that?
The option that we've been working on otherwise?
So, yeah.
Yes, I mean, I'm going to look at ENC. I believe those plans have been vetted by the county. And do you want to speak to where they are in terms of the permitting process?
Sorry, I was talking to Mark for a second. The question was, where are we with a permitting process with the county at the moment? Is that correct?
Yeah, kind of, Jay, but let me tell you, maybe I should be a little clearer. What I'm interested is on time to, you know, to really allow us to get on a path, just make a decision for a path for the stables. And if we were to say, you know what, these have all been great ideas, but a trade-off is if we want to go with what the ad hoc committee and the working groups have come up with, those are great ideas, but it's going to take 3 years to get through the permitting. Because another trade-off could be, you know what, maybe that's down the road. Let's just go with the repair option because we're already well down that road and we could start something sooner. I'm just concerned about that 3 years of, oh my gosh, I'll start again.
Yeah, it would certainly be a lot quicker with what we have at the moment with the repair plan because it's currently in county use permit review. After that, we do still need to finish our construction document drawings for the building permit and development agency and some other permits with the county. But the use permit is the first big hurdle we need to get over. That's just like the bones, the basic scope of the project. Then we get into the details about the building permit, you know, how big are the members at the Tevis barn, you know, which buildings we're removing and retaining walls, are we using those? How do we stabilize the slope? The county geologist will weigh in on a lot of the geotechnical issues. So we still have a lot of details to get through, but if we could get over the use permit hurdle, that process will be a lot quicker. As opposed to if we were to start new, we do have to start the use permit process kind of over and, you know, let the county weigh in and think about what's feasible and what's not. And I'm going to look at Gretchen for a second too, to see if I missed anything on that. With the starting over, right? Sure. Yeah. Okay. So let's think about that. If we were to go back to the county with what we currently have with a use permit in November, say, the county will likely approve what we have. You know, if we give them the road, the sprinklers, everything they ask for, they should be able to turn that around really quickly because Susanna has been really good about developing that relationship with the county, and they are here to help us. but there are just a lot of requirements that they can't get over. So they should be able to get that approved. I want to say optimistically 3 months. We start our engineers again to finish up the construction documents. That's another 6 months. So that's 9, puts us at around August timeframe. And then we go back for building permit. And then we should be able to start construction maybe in calendar year 26. And in our schedule that we previously proposed to the board in May, we were aiming to start construction in January of 2027. Yeah, we're in that time frame still to start kind of late 26, early 27 timeframe to start construction. You have something there?
Gretchen Austin, Senior Planner. I saw all the, cogs turning, and I just want to say, I think that based on what I'm hearing from Jay, I think that it is a reasonable estimate, but I would say it would be great if staff could take the week, and we could probably by next week's meeting, just so you're not put on the spot at the podium trying to figure out the schedule. But certainly there would be a lot of efficiencies to where we are. We have spent since 2019 working with the county on the repair plan to get it where it is today.
Okay. Thank you. Director Holman.
So, given what you just said, Gretchen, like working with the county since 2019 to get where we are today, that's 5 years. I'm not totally naive about construction and planning. And I'm just wondering, and I'm actually inviting any of our members here at the table too. I'm struggling to see how it would take 5 years, given we have a relationship with the county about this site, and they're familiar with what is there, and nothing that's been proposed changes everything. I'm struggling with why it would take 3 years just to get to where we are now. Can you help me understand that?
So if a new plan is proposed to the board for their consideration, a new design plan would need to be initiated.
Sure.
So we would need to get a consultant on board. We'd have to go through the contracting process, get board approvals for the contracts. We would have to develop a, concept plan, 30%. We would have to resubmit a new use permit application with that new plan set. So it really would be starting over with a new design plan. Now, it has taken us 5 years because we've gone through considering several different permitting approaches over this time since 2019. However, it would certainly still take several years to contract, get the team on board, develop plans, go through a new use permit, submittal, and the full permitting process. That's very typical now for our capital improvement projects, that they absolutely take 2 to 3 fiscal years.
So I'm going to go back to where I was, though. It's like there's not, and we don't have one overlaid over the other, but we're not starting over from my perspective. And again, and having been involved in other construction projects, I'm involved in one right now. We're not starting over. So we do need to make changes. Let's just say what parts of the site plan that the site design group has come up with. It would be a revision or an amendment to. I don't see it as like starting over. I'm really confused by that.
So it depends on what your final option is. I'm explaining what it would be like if the change was large enough that it is starting over. Now, if you just have small tweaks to the current repair plan, that's different. That would be more as an amendment. But it all depends on where you all end. and what that looks like and how that compares to the current one.
It'd probably be good to have some clarity on that, and we're not going to have that today. But I do have some other questions. Okay, so, and I think they're pertinent to what we do after this meeting and going forward. One of them was, I did make note of them here. One of them was potential impacts that were identified. And Mike pointed this out. One of the drawings that was put up on the screen was indicating that the upper road would be 24 feet wide, but we've done a lot of work. I mean, I give the benefit to these guys, done a lot of work. 16 plus 2 plus 2 satisfies the fire marshal as opposed to 24 feet.
Based on what we've heard so far in our coordination with the county fire marshal, they are requiring 20 feet plus 2 feet shoulder on each side, especially for this road where there's a big drop off on the outboard side and you have a big slope on the inboard side. You would want some shoulder width. So that's how we got to the 24.
Okay. As far as construction costs. This has come up in the past. What came up today was, it did come up today. I'm aware of a number of projects in my town that have been managed by nonprofits. And they have to satisfy some requirements, certainly basic requirements that are not fungible, that the city has. But nonprofits often manage construction projects at great savings. And it's in agreement with the agency and check-ins and collaboration with the agency. And a few things make it much more economical. One is that nonprofits can seek and approach in-kind donations and effort that agencies generally don't and can't. It doesn't involve so much overhead of staff time. And again, it's not saying that staff wouldn't have any involvement. There'd be check-in periods as would be identified. Government agencies are usually charged a premium because they're government agencies and there's a lot of red tape to go through. So there's usually a premium charged by contracting construction. And also nonprofits can oftentimes negotiate contracts where government agencies really can't do that much. So again, there are requirements like prevailing wage. I think Hillary mentioned, I don't know if she's still here or not, but prevailing wage would be one of those. Yes, that would be one of them for sure. But I just want to keep that on the table. I was also, I don't know when this is going to come up again, but anticipating that it might again. I noticed in the responses to the questions that were provided to us that maintenance was one of the categories of how to evaluate whether something was a financial savings or not. And at least I don't recall this. I don't recall maintenance being a factor when the board was considering the construction costs and the repair and rehabilitation costs. So I just want to make sure, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but I just want to make sure we're comparing apples to apples.
So when we presented in May, we had two components, the capital costs and the operational costs. So that includes the maintenance costs. And then obviously, those are going to be costs regardless, but part of your planning could be, can you assign that to other than the district, right? And what would that work financially? That's a consideration. But certainly, whenever we look at the financially feasible, that includes both capital and maintenance and management.
And if I remember correctly, the concessionaire agreement has a maintenance component to it. So that burden, I don't know how much of that burden, I don't recall, but some of that burden is certainly on the concessionaire.
Under the current concessionaire agreement, although I have to say, given the current framework where there's a lack of revenue coming in, we've alleviated them of that responsibility to a large degree, other than the day-to-day care of the horses.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's a road we want to go down though. It's-
Yeah, no,
Yeah. So,
no, certainly we would like to be in a situation where the day-to-day operations are handled by whoever's managing the stables.
okay. And then, I think we might have a couple of follow-up questions having to do with water, and potable toilets, potable water and, flush toilets, just as a follow-up, but, I think that's most of my questions. Oh, I have one other one, which is, fundraising has brought this up about taking people out and get them interested in investing in a new program there, investing in a restoration of a building, whatever. The site really needs to be cleaned up. And I'm just wondering how quickly we can do that, even utilizing volunteers, or it's gonna have to be cleaned up anyway, no matter what. So I think the sooner we can accomplish that, the more successful this endeavor and the more good faith is gonna be put forward to all the effort that's been put out there to try to come up with a good plan. So can you respond to that, Brian?
Yeah, so I mean, we've taken dumpster loads out, right? And some of that was done with concessionaire and with volunteers in the community. If you're talking about cleanup as far as the removal of some of the dilapidated buildings, that will need to be permitted. Yeah, we certainly, and maybe that's part of the interim plan to look at, what additional cleanup can occur that doesn't have to be permitted.
Well, I mean, there's like abandoned vehicles and there's like a junk, shed from Home
Yeah,
Depot or something
and
like
we had
that. It's like-
hoped that the concessionaire would be able to continue to handle a lot of that. But right now, they're not bringing in enough revenue to have staffing to be able to do those types of things. So we would have to, look forward, either through volunteerism, how could we accomplish those goals, or assigning staff resources. But of course, that has trade-offs with our ability to perform other tasks.
Well, like I
But-
say, these are things that are gonna have to be done, no matter what happens.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the sooner the better, and I think it would be a good faith effort towards the community, so.
Yeah, and I think that could be something, like the plans for that could be rolled into the proposals that the board reviews and sees in November.
Okay,
Because you're assigning staff resources and that sort of thing. It's the type of thing the board should make the decision on.
okay, very good, thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
Um, Yeah, questions from the working group members? Yeah.
I'm just asking for some clarity on this, please. This is, my name is Pam Warren. This is a letter or an email, sorry, that was forwarded to all of the working groups. And it is dated 4/17/2024 from Rob Campbell, who's the fire marshal. And it says, "Thank you for your patience." And then there's the opening paragraph. And then he has some bullet points, and he is saying regarding the road design, entrance road before the split, demonstrate the maximum width possible with the goal of, 20 feet to accommodate two-way traffic, period. We can consider less than 20 feet with mitigation, but it must be greater than 16. The second sentence reads, use of a one-way road concept after the split is preferred for fire department design. That minimum shall be 12 feet with a driving surface of 14 feet wide, clear of obstructions and vegetation. And then it talks more about turnaround space at the convergence. Access should be aggregate base acceptable on low slopes, fire hydrant placement and pressure, which is not part of my question. My question is, am I reading this correctly, or is there more correspondence that clarifies those road widths? Thank you.
I can clarify that. Let me go back to the site plan we had earlier. So Rob's comment was you're allowed to use 16, 14 or 16 feet at the upper road for one way, meaning you come into the stables, it's a one-way road at the upper road to the back, and then you go down to the lower arena, come back out through the lower road. It's a one-way loop around. That was something we also talked about at the May 14th meeting. You know, similar to this site plan here, we'll still need retaining walls and we'll still need some grading at the upper road area. But Pamela's right, the width will be smaller, more narrow, and that could be considered for a one-way road. But from what we understood, the proposal from the focus working group was to use the upper road as a 20-foot width, drivable width. So that's a two-way road that is currently being proposed. But Pam, Ms. Warren is correct that the fire marshal did indicate we can narrow that road down to 14 or 16 feet if it were a one-way road.
Okay.
I'll go, huh? No. Understanding your comments there and what you said the fire marshal has expressed, I think at this point it is prudent for us to yield and say, make plan of record a 24-foot wide surface and figure out what we need to do to make it a 2-lane road so we do not have cross-traffic circulation down in the operation areas, which is a critical factor. Make it so that the roadway can get put in. If we have to put a retaining wall in there that's about 50 foot long, I would have your people start looking at that and see if we can do some soil tests or something to find out what we need to do in that specific area on the upper road to get it done.
And with all due respect to Mike, because he's an engineer and has spent an enormous amount of time on this, the committee has not vetted this, so Mike can't speak at this point for the working group. And I apologize for that, but I'm just trying to keep us all legal here.
Any other questions from working group members? Do we have any public comment?
Chair, Lisa, we do not.
Okay, so comments, ideas? Director Riffle.
Well, I'll start because we better start thinking fast. We've got about 6 weeks, right? I think Anna said, so basically by October 30th, we've got to have something for staff to be able to start preparing for an 11/20 meeting. So that's 6 weeks from yesterday. So with that in mind, and I think Anna did a nice job of saying there's really 4 elements here that the board had issues with. It was a 4-3 vote. That was costs, that was impact on staff, that was a number of public that would be, and then the role of staff going forward, district going forward and managing this place. So in 6 weeks, we need to come up with some answers to what that would be. I'm a little bit concerned, no, I'm a lot concerned that while we have a good process going now, we're not going to converge in 6 weeks. That especially given kind of the silos that we're working in. So I'm going to think out loud here a little bit of, I would just wonder if we should change our process to allow, if you will, these 3 elements to actually more converge. And maybe we come up with kind of a subcommittee, if you will, or something along those lines. That gets us ready, answers those 4 questions, given all the wisdom that we've all learned over this, takes into account what staff, the traffic cone staff gave us this afternoon, the things to be looking at, to come up with, here's the short plan, the short-term plan, here's the kind of for the board to say, okay, we'll invest in phase 1. Well, that's the one thing that I'm trying to think of how my colleagues on the board are going to feel. What is it they're going to want to hear that will make them say, we're willing to invest to get you to phase 1, or we're willing to invest for another X number of months or something to allow this thing to be filled out further. So I think there actually needs to be now a kind of a more concentrated effort of getting ready for that. How do we answer those questions? So let me throw that back to my colleagues.
Just to that point, Susanna had already proposed a process that we could use to have that sort of that reformed working group that brings together people from all of the working groups that we currently have.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, so you definitely can utilize that form to allow you to collaborate together and to come up with, to flesh out those ideas. I bring the schedule back so you can take a look at it. We do have a meeting scheduled for next week, next Thursday. Our original plan is for the fundraising partnership group to present their findings. However, you can use that time to do what we talked about at the last meeting. Use that time as working sessions to all together and share your ideas. Yeah, so that is at your discretions.
So just one opinion on that. I think we should actually have a component of the original idea that the fundraising and partnership group hasn't had its opportunity to really present its ideas in that form, right? They've had a couple of opportunities to give us a little preview, but I would like to have that in some form. But yeah, in general, I like the idea of, I think the whole process has to be rethought a little bit in terms of getting to this convergence.
Right. So 2 ideas. One is just for the fundraising group to share their ideas in writing. Then we can just distribute to the working group ahead of your next Thursday's meeting. And then we use the Thursday meeting to reflect on the fundraising group's thoughts, and also to talk about how to, now that you actually have all the pieces together, and then you can talk about how to put them all together at the next week's meetings.
I did send the meeting notes from last week. I sent to Susanna to share with the other working groups, and also we submitted some questions for the other 2 working groups. So having answers to those would be helpful to help us all move forward. And so if I understand what you're saying, Susanna, we'll talk about we'll convene next Thursday to talk about how we move forward from there, as opposed to trying to decide that right now.
So we can use next Thursday to have all the working group members together and to discuss the different options and how do you fit all the pieces together. I offer and form at the last meeting that the working group can, the ad hoc committee can consider that we'll do kind of discussion sessions instead of providing that offer that hybrid meetings. We will do in-person meeting only, and all the working group members here and those are public meetings. Public are welcome to participate and listen to the discussions, but the meeting is not online. It's really just to allow you to come all together to talk about all the ideas that you have today and how you can work together to come up with a set of recommendations. And you can report out your discussion at your next meetings. That is publicly noticed and also offer online. And then we can also, if that meeting is successful, it's helpful, and you need more of those opportunity, we can schedule another one before your October 16th. So you have a couple more opportunities to just roll up your sleeve and talk among yourself and come up with some suggestions and then formally discuss at the October 16th meeting.
Are you done? Are you done? Okay. So I would like actually to not use email as a way to present what funding and partnership. Please give the opportunity for 30 minutes.
Okay, yeah.
To make at the start, which I think is where maybe Craig was going on that.
Okay.
And I think I owe it to the committee
Okay.
to say,
Oh, that'd be great.
here's what we've done, and have a chance for people to ask questions and so on. So done. We've got all three. Thank you very much. At that point, then
we can,
okay,
yeah.
then we push back. and
Okay.
say,
Yes.
okay, at that point, we've got 5 weeks.
Okay, that's fine.
And one of the things that I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I would just say that that's fine. We can do that as well. So that at the next week's meeting, we will have, we will start with hybrid meetings that you will present. Your working group will present to other working group as well as the general public, so they can hear your presentations online as well. And then after that, we can just change our meeting format to discussions in person only, and allow you all to just discuss as a group for the remainder of the meetings.
Right. Okay. Rather than completely punt until September 26th, when all of a sudden magic appears, I think after we have a chance to present, I think what I would like to do is start the process of possibly weekly, because between September 26th and October 16th, that's what, 3 weeks? Two weeks?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think at least once a week, we need to take advantage of what I'll call the Susanna option of pulling the folks together and maybe we schedule those on when we get together, if not tonight, but at least to schedule those to when we have a collaborative, we get this room together and we have a collaborative working meeting to get to come up with what are we going to tell the board, answer honest 4 questions.
Yes.
And think about how do we face this thing? How do we answer the questions the board could say, yep, we could sign up for that. And I don't know another way, and I'll leave it to my colleagues or members of the panel up here if there's a better way to utilize the time.
That's great. So maybe you can provide a little bit more guidance so staff can think about it and help you plan it. Would you prefer those meetings take place during evening hours or regular work hours?
I guess I'm going to look to our distinguished panel here, because we've got to have you guys involved. So whether it's you personally or at least speak for your colleagues, evening's better.
Okay.
Evening's better.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I know that's going to take staff time, but
but that's fine, because if we do not have to broadcast them, I think that will definitely simplifies the process and and staff support as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And the one thing that I would add is 2 of those 4 things that Anna asked involve staff. involve district resources. So I think we need to have staff involved with us and working with us.
Yeah.
To be able to answer those so that we basically go arm in arm, if
Yeah.
you will, to the board
Yeah.
in November.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, just, I'm sorry, Director Holm.
Question here.
Oh.
Feel that, it would be.
Right.
Hi, Kristen Reichmuth. I think it would be extremely beneficial if people could join in by Zoom as well. It was difficult for one from our team to come today, and I had to bail from, it was difficult. So is it possible to do a combination?
Maybe let's,
And then if maybe if we could do right, like at a 3:30 timeframe again, but definitely not during the day.
I think we were talking at a later time, so maybe let's.
If it could be a combo, maybe at an earlier time, ideally though, in the evening for all. Because many of the people in our group are working.
I think we decided, let's go evening, period. That's what we're
And
gonna do.
then Zoom as well.
Well,
I'll
the
leave it.
challenge with doing hybrid is that if you're not at the microphone, the people online cannot hear. So you can either sit at the dais or use the microphone in order for the people that are joining the meeting online to hear you. So that is kind of the challenge. That's why and we have that format for you for the last few meetings that was not very effective, and that's why we were trying to figure a way so that you can talk more freely and doesn't have that constraints that everyone, when they trying to talk, they have to open the mic or pass the mic around in order for other online to participate. Yeah, so that's why we change or suggest use in person only, and then everyone at the table, you can just talk freely. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we went to these breakout sessions and I think they were pretty effective. Right?
Yeah.
I think we had really good discussion there, but to do that, it basically has to be in person only.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And at least what I envision is that if we go with that options and we don't even break it out, everyone at the same table, everyone hear the conversation, everyone has the opportunity to weigh in.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think we'll have to have a limited number of participants per working group.
Yeah.
But other people could be there
Yeah.
hearing it. Right.
Yeah. So I think that's enough direction for staff to help plan those meetings. And I will go back and then to take a look at the dates and offer some dates for you to consider. And for next week's meeting, we will hold the meeting. The first portion of the meeting will be hybrid to allow the fundraising group to do their presentations. And then after that, we will change to in-person only for discussions. And then I will plan a couple more leading up to your meetings on October 16th.
I just
Okay.
wanted to echo something that Director Riffle said, that I think in the long run, if we're coming to the board with something that the staff members are buying into, right, that we've worked out together and we've, sort of done a reconciliation process on these different ideas that we have, and we're able to, say, have the staff think about ways to maybe reduce or stage or modify the plans that we have, but in a way that's not so disruptive. So that, all of this work that they've done is fully taken into account, but they're buying into the new ideas and modifications, then I think we have a good chance, right? If we're going sort of separately and disconnected, then we have no chance.
Yeah.
And what I saw in the previous meeting in the breakout sessions was staff really engaging and, really being constructive. And at that time, I think there's a little bit of this difficulty that, the hard discussion we had today wasn't really out on the table, and they were trying to get into that. But now I think we've got that on the table, and we can figure out how can we get on one plan,
Yeah.
right? That really is the best thing that we can present to the board, and I think that's where we need to go. Director Holman.
I mean, in a perfect world, I would agree with you, and in a reality, and in a practical sense, I mean, I am a board member, but if I was another board member, I think I would appreciate, yeah, it's like, here's a kumbaya. Great if we can all come together. But there could be alternatives too within that, or options, that are separate from that I think board members might actually very much appreciate. And I think it's not necessarily realistic to think, I mean, as idealistic as I can be sometimes, I don't think it's necessarily realistic to think that we're all going to agree on everything. And I think there's nothing wrong with having some options for the board to pick and choose. Yeah, I'm not saying like, wholesale, we don't agree on anything, but even if you look at what we have now, it's not 100% everything's been thrown out either. So anyway.
Sure, I think we could have different options, right? But I would want, for example, if we have cost estimates associated with them, I think we can't be disconnected on those, right?
I don't know what you mean.
I mean, we can't be going back to the board with, say, different numbers. What do we expect it to cost?
Well, there is this issue of, Midpen managing a project versus a nonprofit managing a project. So we're not going to have absolute numbers maybe by the November date. But, I can ask some more questions. Anybody else who has experiences with working with government agencies, and what's a percentage? Is it 20% less expensive, generally speaking, to work through a nonprofit as opposed to a government agency? We could come up with numbers like that, but as a rule of thumb.
But even in that discussion, can we get to agreement on some parameters, right? That we're going to cost it in this way, right? I think that.
Sure, I still know what you mean. What do you cost it in this way? What do you mean?
So for example, if we have a case where some component of the plan might be managed by a nonprofit, can we agree on some parameters for costing that component, right? You listed a number of reasons why that could actually be cheaper, right? So.
Well, I think Hillary mentioned the parameters that the district would be requiring. So I think we have those as a basis, prevailing wage being a prominent one.
Okay, well, I think we can discuss this going forward then.
Okay. I think we have a plan, so.
Okay.
Yep.
Any other, let's see. We have an oral communications item.
We did not have any public comments for either item number F and no oral comments.
Okay. Any other points before we adjourn? Thank you all. Okay, thank you very much. We're adjourned.